Denise, I'm going to share my screen. Folks, let me know if you cannot see it for some reason.
Looks
Are you
good.
able to see the screen?
Yep, looks great. Thank you.
Awesome. I want to start off by saying creating product vision is essentially inventing the future, and it is a hard thing to do. It is a hard thing to do for three reasons. Reason number one is because you have to think long term. It basically means that you have to step back from your day to day to think about, are we in a worthwhile problem space? Are we in a problem space that's solving big and frequent problems? Is it a growing market? And does our company have a defensible moat? You have to think through those things. And you have to make a leap of faith to imagine a compelling future state. That's hard to do. But that's one of the three reasons why it's hard to do. The second reason why it's hard to do is because you have to be strategic with solutioning. Any big problem usually has more than one way of solving it. The job of the product leader is to find out a solution path which not only delights the customers, but also does it in a way that is hard to copy and that is sustainable and eventually profitable in the long term. That's also hard to do. The third reason it's hard to do is because you have to ship. You have to make things real. You can't just say, okay, we'll go to the moon and then go to Area 51 and make a recording. You have to really do things that you say you will. And that involves thinking through the build out sequence, creating room for learning, creating room for change management. All of that is also hard to do, which is why the job of a product leader to do product vision and strategy is so important, because it's hard to get right and so important to do it. So when Denise and I first met and talked about doing this session, the first thing I did was to look around the internet to see what content already exists. So I don't just like create duplicative content. And then we realized as I started looking that there's a lot of content, but it's focused mostly on foundational concepts. What do we mean by vision? What does mission mean? What does strategy mean? How are these things different? Taking examples of various companies and comparing what their mission and vision and strategy look like. That's great. And then there are other content which are about giving you a template for how to go about creating vision and strategy. It's not that any of those are wrong. They're not wrong. The problem is that they're foundational in the sense that they tell you what to do, but they don't necessarily tell you how to get there. So that's what we decided to focus this session on, which is real world experience and practical recommendations for how do you go from soup to nuts in terms of starting a vision project and then successfully executing it. So if you are someone who is freshly learning about these concepts, about what these are, this may not be a great session for you because this is not a one-on-one session. But if you are someone who's familiar with the concepts, but you're trying to make sure that your next vision and strategy project is successful, that is where I think we'll have a great conversation in the next hour. Before I start with that, just a little bit about me. I was born in India to Indian parents in 1980s, which basically means that I had only two career choices. One is to be an engineer or to be a doctor. What I really wanted was to be an actor, but obviously my parents shut it down, which is why I am coming to you through this webinar and not through a big silver screen. Anyway, I grew up in India. I spent time in London and in China before ultimately settling in sunny Seattle, which is where I live now. Most of what I learned about product and tech software development, I did in three big companies, Microsoft, Google, and Guild. I spent a lot of time at Microsoft working on online advertising problems, both display advertising, performance advertising, search advertising. Then I spent some time on workplace productivity, both for leaders as well as knowledge workers. At Google, I spent a bunch of time on e-commerce, B2B e-commerce, doing some strategy work. And presently, I work for Guild, where we are trying to create solutions that help bring career mobility to millions of American workers. As a product leader, I care about two big things. One is launching and scaling really great products. And then 2 is people, which is building high-performing teams. The picture on the right is me and my son on our trip to Arizona. He is the greatest product I ever shipped, but he's also 8 years old, which means we are currently entering product-led growth. Just basically a fancy way of saying that he doesn't listen to anything I say. All right, with that, let's get into the meat of things, which is how do we run the vision and strategy project? The first thing, like I said, the goal of any vision strategy product is to ultimately inspire action, and it is to translate ideas into launches, into successful launches. What I try to outline are 5 key steps that, in my experience, are crucial to get right. Setup is all about kickoff. It's about kicking off the project with the right configuration and the right expectations. Insights is foundational to everything that you do in terms of building the product vision and strategy. And we'll talk about how do you gather those insights and how do you process those insights and what's the outcome of that. Third is strategy. A lot of companies go straight from product vision to a long list of feature deliverables, and strategy is often the missing piece. So we'll talk about what strategy actually means, what are the core components of it, and how do you go about creating it. Socialization, you might think, why do you have it here? It's because any compelling vision requires not just engagement and alignment from other cross-functional stakeholders like go-to-market or sales teams, marketing teams and strategy teams and operations teams, but you also require active contribution from them. So we'll talk about some of the learnings I have on socialization of vision and strategy. The last step is action, which is about bringing things to life. We'll talk about what kind of processes you want to instill trust, to constantly listen, and to be ready for change management, because that's the one thing that is inevitable, which is as no plan meets that meets the enemy actually survives. So in the sense, as you start to roll out your strategy, you have to have ways of listening and changing. We're going to talk about those things. Each of these sections warrant a deep discussion of their own. We can spend half an hour in each of these, but given the time we have today, I'm going to focus on key points. We'll do some Q&A at the end of this, but this session is mostly just to give you a full overview of end-to-end journey of what that looks like. And then in the future session, we can do deep dives. Let's start with setup. Setup, as I said, is about kicking off the project with the right configuration expectations, and it's important to get 4 things right. The first thing to get right is to have clear definition about what is the zoom level you're operating on, and what I mean by that is, are you thinking of a feature area level? Are you thinking domain level? Are you thinking your entire product? What is the scope of the vision that you are the vision work that you're setting out to do, and what is the objective? Is the objective that you are trying to make short-term optimizations? Are you thinking about over the next 3 years, what is the big thing? What are the major product investments and shifts you want to make? Or are you thinking more venturing and a larger 10 years looking out and saying, what are the new problem spaces that the company should enter into? And these are how you conduct the project varies significantly based on what your objective is and what your zoom level is. The second step is securing sponsorship and managing expectations. It's really important to have a senior leader, preferably a C-level leader like a CTPO or a CPO, to sponsor this work, because any large vision and strategy work requires a lot of complex decision making. So you not only need resources to go work on vision and strategy work, but you also need decision-making support, and that's where executives can come in handy. Now, executives don't just come for free, they come with expectations. So you need to actively manage expectations in terms of time, in terms of quality and scope. Just like any other software project, these constraints apply, what you can get done in terms of scope and quality and time. The next one is to engage key decision makers. This is one of the more common mistakes that I've seen in my experience, which is that product vision cannot exist in isolation. It needs to be coherent across the company with alignment from folks from strategy and go-to-market, ops, engineering, finance, and so on. The important thing is to engage not just anyone, but people that have decision-making rights in these things. And that is where the previous step of securing sponsorship and making sure that you are set up with the right resources and the right engagement from other teams is really crucial. Because if you start off without that, you will often run into scenarios where there is misalignment or just conflicts that you need to resolve much later in your journey. Last step is bringing the right skills and clarifying R&Rs. Not all product leaders are the same. Product leaders usually fall into four categories: people that are visionaries, people that are operators, people that are processors, and people that are synergists. And these are just, there's a lot of skills that it takes for somebody to be a product manager, and some people spike on some things versus the other. So you want to make sure that you're bringing people that are visionaries, people that have curiosity and the knowledge and the genuine passion and the people skills to pull off a project like this. And as you do, you also want to make sure that if the person who's doing the vision work, who's leading the vision work, is not necessarily the decision maker for that area, you are clarifying the roles and responsibilities of who's making what kind of decisions, who's being in a consultative role, who's playing a decision-making role, who's an approver, and so forth. So all of this is set up. Step 2 is insights. And arguably, this is the most important. Your vision is only as good as the insights that you bring. The first one is to make sure that anything you do is grounded in the company vision and mission. An example of that is, let's say, over the next 3 years, your company is wanting to go big on your current value proposition. We want to acquire as a company more customers. You want to go international. You want to cut costs and be IPO ready. Let's say the company is heading in that direction. And the product vision is now instead looking at, like, what are the new problems to solve and what are new value props to pursue. Then you're basically not in alignment with what the company is looking for and what you're working on. It's really important that product vision and strategy accrues to what the company vision and mission and objectives are. So the first thing to do is to read and reread what the company objectives are, what the vision is, and what the mission is, and so forth over the next, whatever the time frame of this work is. The second one is really important. As product leaders, the most important thing you can do is to fall in love with the problem before you go into the solutioning. What that means is to delve into the problem space from multiple dimensions. One is to understand the problem space from the user's perspective. What are the challenges that the user is facing? What are the present solutions? What are the issues with that? How do they see success? Other barriers they have. Similarly, you want to understand a user and customer are not always the same thing. You want to understand who's the payer, if they have, what their perspective is, what problems they're looking to solve, as well as overall market, the size of the market, as well as what the competitive landscape is. And you also want to talk to industry experts, look at data as it exists, all to really get a perspective for the problem space that you are going to look at. The next thing is leveraging internal SMEs. It's important because one thing to note is you don't have to be an expert as a product leader in the domain that you were working on. And it's a controversial thing to say. I'm presently working in an edtech space, and I'm by no means an expert in the edtech landscape, but it's important that the project has expertise. It's not important that you are the expert as the leader of the visioning project. And these internal subject matter experts could be leaders, C-level leaders. It could be people in strategy teams. Sometimes these are people in marketing. It's important that you identify these people and you tap into those people as consultants to this work. The last thing I will say is, when you are doing the opportunity framing is what are the vision statement you are looking to make. It's important to be bold, or it's also important to be grounded in the sense that it is a worthwhile opportunity to pursue. And how do you know it's worthwhile? Usually it's 3 things. The first thing is that, are you looking at a problem that is big and frequent? You don't want to solve small and rare problems. because there's not much opportunity in it to flourish as a growing business. But ideally, you look at big and frequent problems. Then you look at the market landscape. Are their customers willing to pay to solve those problems? Are the users willing to pay to solve those problems? Are there competition is a good thing because it creates the market, it creates validations that you can learn from and so forth. And lastly, is that a defensible moat as a company? And there's many forms of defensible moat. It could be economies of scale, it could be network effects, or it could be things like IP or loyalty from the customer. So anytime you come up with a vision statement, it needs to take into consideration behind the scenes all of these things are actually true. Otherwise, you're just making moonshot statements that are not grounded in thorough analysis. Next, we'll move to strategy. As I mentioned, this is one of the critical steps that is often not done well. And mostly it's because of two reasons. One is an understanding of strategy. Mostly it's inability to make hard decisions and A or B choices. But let's get to what is the right way to do it. My experience is, number one, so what is strategy? Strategy is a combination of kind of two or three things. First is when you understand the problem space, the next job to do is to go in and figure out what are the various personas in the problem space and what are the problems to solve, which problems / user benefits, which is a flip of that, which problems are worthy of solving, are the most important ones to solve. And then how do you solve it in a way that creates differentiated offering by your company? And then the third thing that also needs to go, it's not just compelling problems, most important problems, and a differentiated solution, but you also want it to be done in a way that is sustainable, that the company can survive and eventually get to profitability in using the strategy that you pick. Like I said, a problem space you can approach with multiple solutions. Take a problem space like navigation. There's products like Google Maps, Apple Maps, and Waze. They all have slightly different strategies. Waze, for example, I don't know how many people use Waze. It optimizes for the shortest path, and it'll take you on routes, whereas like Google Maps usually optimizes for peace of mind. That's like, there is an inherent strategy of why these products are different, and each strategy leads to different value propositions, different differentiation and sustainability. It's worthwhile to be clear about that. And there's various tools to use in creation of strategy, things like Kano model, things like strategy canvas. All of these are tools that you can use to define your strategy. At the end of the day, all those tools, what they're doing is identifying the list of problems to solve or user benefits, and then categorizing them as must-haves or delighters or performance features, and then comparing how other competitors value these things and how you want to stand up against it. For example, if you're building, let's say, Instagram, strategy for Instagram, and you're comparing it to any other photo sharing application, you might say that uploading pictures quickly is one of the user benefits or a problem to solve, and making pictures look good is a second problem to solve. And Instagram strategy is to make it really quick to upload pictures and to make it really easy to make the pictures look good. The rest of the capabilities of being able to share and being able to store, all of that can be just table stakes and same as any other product. So you just have a differentiated, so there's tools that help you get to this strategy, like Kano model and strategy canvas. Also important is validating strategy. The worst thing you can do is to just have one idea and then go deep, double down on that one idea. So it's important that as you come up with strategy, you have equally powerful options, equally valid paths that you validate through prototyping, talking to the users, doing interviews. Customer advisory boards can be super helpful here, where you can get early inputs and make even your most valuable customers feel part of the solutioning and part of strategy making. And these are great things to validate early on versus much later in the game. The next thing is making hard decisions, alternate paths and trade-offs, which is where, again, like identifying multiple paths will help you understand what kind of trade-offs you will be making if you choose path one versus or path two. Last thing I will underscore is on monetization. A lot of times we approach things from, hey, once we create value, we can figure out how to monetize the value we create. Not wrong. All I want to say there is, while that is a necessary condition that you need to have something of value for you to monetize it, it's not always a sufficient condition that, oh, just because you have value that you can successfully monetize it in a sustainable way. So just don't make that to be an afterthought later on. Just think it through. How do you monetize? What is the business model for the product, and how is that sustainable? Step number 4 is socialization. Like I said, any meaningful, compelling vision requires not just work from the product team, but also work from alignment and even active contribution from so many other functions. And product vision and strategy have multiple audiences. It could be leaders, go-to-market teams, your board, your customers. So it's really important that you have effective tools to communicate the vision and strategy that you have come up with. And usually bringing these vision to life, visuals and storytelling are one of the most compelling ways to do that. It does not mean that you front load all of your product specification work and show a screen by screen, like a flow walkthrough of what your future product will look like. The idea is to pick a few signature concepts and bring it to life through visuals. That's the idea of showing visuals. Usually there is a bit of a risk with this, and you have to proactively manage, which is sometimes people look at the visuals and they assume that's what we're building. And people start to, especially sales teams, can sometimes take those visuals, if not actively managed, and then present to the customers. And then that becomes the expectation, not giving them the room for the actual teams to iterate and to learn and change. So which is why, like, you have to keep it high level, and you have to add all the caveats about, hey, this is illustrator, it's not the actual product that you will see. Several times, there are many use cases, as I was saying, for vision and strategy. And so therefore, how you speak to your leaders with whom you might want to have a conversation and get their buy-in will be different from how you speak to your broader company when you're trying to present the vision, or how you speak with the go-to-market team who are basically actively trying to sell. What you say to them, so long as the audience and the use case is different, you need to tailor the content of what you present about your vision and strategy based on the audience and the use case. And product marketing teams can be extremely of leverage in these efforts. There are often times you have to make short-term and long-term trade-offs. So it's really important that you don't just find sponsors internally, but you also have sponsors externally. And who are these sponsors? These are customers, like customers that see it, they get excited, they want this. And that can be super helpful in terms of like actually making that vision a reality, versus reality of life sometimes is that you prioritize short-term things you need to get done over forward-looking, and it helps to have sponsors on both ends, so you can have that balance. Lastly, when you do this, like, broader share out is the first time that a lot of people are exposed to your vision. So you might have instances where you're getting valid, legitimate feedback about either a missed insight or a missed value proposition or an overlooked assumption. And it's totally fair to take those things back into the strategic thinking process and revise things. The last slide I have is on action. Like I said, the goal of vision and strategy is to inspire action. It's ultimately to launch successfully. There's 3 things that I would say. First is to build a product roadmap, identifying the various strategy pillars that you outlined as part of your vision strategy work. You might think that it actually does 2 purposes. Purpose number 1 is it helps give direction to the team on, okay, here is what we said as the future state and our strategy, and here is how we'll bring it to life. It serves that purpose, but more importantly, it also gives you a way to influence your own sales teams and even the customers about what they are looking for in the future. Building a product roadmap is almost like you're kind of declaring the realization of your vision and influencing what do the salespeople actually sell. In the absence of product roadmap, the sellers will be incentivized to close the deal. in the presence of roadmap, there is an additional thing which allows them to, what is the thing that you can sell against? So it actually helps to create that insurance of like, whatever you're planning, you have a declaration of what's coming. So that can be used. Again, the trick is, the caveat here is to put in enough disclaimers to say, give yourself enough buffer. So you're not like working against like hard deadlines, self-imposed hard deadlines. The next thing is, as I mentioned, no plan survives enemy with the contact, a contact with the enemy. So what that means is you need to have two mechanisms ready. First mechanism is a listening mechanism, and the second mechanism is a change management mechanism. So the listening mechanism can take many forms. One, you want to obviously listen to the users and the customers. So you can have in-product telemetry, in-product surveys and things, as well as active user research. You could talk to your customer service teams. You can also look at new upcoming customer deals and conversations to see what is the feedback from the customers as you roll these out. But also from a company standpoint, typically most companies have a dedicated strategy team which looks out at the market, and then sometimes as things get triggered, translate to new strategic bets. Staying in tune, staying grounded, and having an ear to the ground on all of these things offers the chance for you to be proactive and pick up on areas that might trigger changes to your strategy and vision and roadmap. So you want to lay those foundations to always be listening. And then this is what we did in Guild more recently, is to create a governance forum. What that is once you listen and you have a strong reason to change the direction, even if it's a small change or a large change, it's important that you might not need the large effort that you needed at the first time you created vision and strategy, but you do need three things. You need transparency, you need inclusion, and you need a plan of record where you are making a change to the direction, a change to the roadmap. And that's the purpose of a governance forum. It's usually attended by senior leaders, key stakeholders of product roadmap, and that is where you have an opportunity to say, hey, here is what we've learned from the market, or here is the strategic edit that we've worked on, and this is what it means in terms of changes to the product direction. And that can be a very effective place where the organization is coming together on what the changes are. The last slide I have is on common failure conditions. I won't describe it line by line, but a lot of you, as you scroll through this, you will see some of this is, you might find familiarity with some of these issues. One thing I will say is a lot of times people confuse prioritization for focus. Prioritization means that you might have 100 things to do, but you are helping the team prioritize like 1 to 100. Focus is different. Focus means that taking that 100 and then making it into a 10 or a 20 item list that the team can focus on. And focus is way better than prioritization. It's because prioritization helps with like stack ranking and all of this, but there is still a lot of context switching. And there's study after study that shows like the more context switching you do, the less the throughput is, even if you give clear sense of prioritization. There are articles on the internet about, I think Pandora or someone, there is this logic of, oh, why don't we just decide the investment mix? Like we'll invest 20% in this, 30% in this, and then let each stakeholder pick their percentage and they make their choices. Everybody gets like, hey, you get 20% of the roadmap, you decide how you want to prioritize. It's the worst way to do it, in my opinion. It kind of takes away the agency. It takes away cross, especially if you're working on a marketplace product and you have multiple stakeholders. It takes away good decision making that is good for the overall marketplace. So that's a common thing. And then the rest of it has to do with either roles and responsibilities not being clear, or not enough resourcing, or not informing leaders on time. Like I said, there's a lot to discuss here. I will pause here for questions and conversation. That is the end of my presentation. And we can have a Q&A session now.
Kaylan, this was great. So thank you so much. Maybe I'd love to start with the individual, right? You kind of said at the beginning, right, that you need people who are visionaries or different types of product leaders. And so what advice might you give for an aspiring product leader who's looking to enhance their skills on how to create a compelling vision or strategy outside of this session, of course? And, what resources might you recommend to somebody in that situation?
That's a great question. Let's talk about what are the skills that you need to be good at visioning. It usually boils down to 4 things. The first one is curiosity. You need to be genuinely curious to understand how things are working, what are the problems that people are facing, and to genuinely have an interest to understand how the things existing are. The second thing that usually comes in super handy is knowledge of what technology can actually do, so you can apply that knowledge to a worthwhile problem. The third thing is passion and people skills to actually persuade a true action and focus on a problem like that. So as you can see, it's not like one thing that you can read off of a book. It's usually the combination of a lot of skills. And a lot of PM job, in my experience, has also been like apprentice art. You watch other people do it, and then there are like parts of it where there's formal training. And that's what I would encourage if in your space that you're working on, if you have an opportunity to identify a small area and run a vision project, or be part of like vision projects that other people are running and watch and learn. But those are usually the skill sets: curiosity, knowledge, people skills, passion to solve problems, and a fair bit of a rebellious mind. You need to be able to challenge status quo and not be afraid to challenge the status quo. Like some people that are willing to break rules without going to jail. But so long as you can, that's the skill set that you need. And some people have that naturally, but you can definitely learn these things.
Yeah, and I love that, like experiential learning, right? Complemented with, books or trainings or other things that you might want to take. And so I think what I hear you saying is like, ask a product leader like yourself, can I get a foot in, right? Can I help on this project if you know that something is kicking off? That's great. One of the questions from one of our community members is, are there any suggestions that you have on a framework, around focus and versus prioritization?
I think I would say this: when we come up with a vision and strategy, it's really important that for each strategy, an example of this. Let's say we are coming up with vision for Netflix, and what is the strategy for Netflix? Netflix strategy might be that, oh, we want to be super with personalization, or we want to be present on all devices, or that we want to be economical and available to everyone. So those might be core strategic pillars. The way to not get into the prioritization rat race is when you have clear metrics defined against these strategic bets. For example, personalization, have a success metric. What that success metric might be that 90% of the time, my users are picking from the top 3 recommendations. So when you have those, and again, these have to be realistic. You can't go full cylinder on all the possible strategic bets on all the possible North Star metrics. So you have to be realistic. But when you have those, you're also doing 2 things. One, you're empowering the team with goals and metrics to pursue without prescribing specific features to go work on. We're not saying that go build collaborative filtering algorithm or go build some other ML thing. Instead, you're saying this is the metric you want to get. So that allows, instead of a big roadmap of features, the contract is on metrics and the focus is with the team to go figure out what's to be done. But it's to identify a core set of success metrics for each of the strategies and then allowing the team to work on.
I love that, like being very outcome driven and working to achieve those outcomes. I know you Guild in particular, right? A lot of your customers, I mean, they're big companies. Yeah. They also love a good roadmap, right? And so, and to like, again, how do you balance that idea? And maybe this extends even beyond the strategy and vision of being outcome driven, but also publishing a roadmap because your customers want to know, hey, here's what's next.
The key, it's we're all trying to learn and do it well. It's a hard problem to get right. Nobody is the next. I've not seen like one company that has like super job of this. We're all trying to learn and do it right. The things that we do is not to, is to choose the altitude at which you want to communicate the roadmap. Instead of like listing every little feature, it's saying like, here are the 4 big areas, and here is, if we do it right, here is the future state that we see, and to try to maintain that number 1 attitude, and number 2 expectations, especially with like your premium customers, saying that, and that's where go-to-market teams can be of great help, where enabling them with the right talking points about you can still show progress against these, but not signing us up for like hard deadlines. It's usually 70 to 80% effective, and 30% of the time, yeah, we do end up with like some strong customer. And it's actually great that a customer is super excited about your vision. It gives you all the firepower even within the company to not work, to put resources on a North Star, which otherwise might have gotten deprioritized for some like day-to-day stuff. So we try to make use of that too, but it's a hard thing to balance.
Totally. I think I love this idea of like Zoom level or the altitude. And you talked about that obviously with the strategy as well as like what Zoom level. So how do you balance this like long-term vision, short-term goals? And again, part of that probably gets maybe past the strategy and vision setting and a little bit into execution. But how do you think about that mix?
In terms of at any point, let's say a beginning of a quarter, how do you figure out the investment mix of how many things you're working on? Gotcha. So it's usually balancing short term and long term. Let's talk about what could be in the short term. Is usually things like, especially in my current role, it could be like there is some customer that we're trying to launch, and there is this one little custom thing that is different for this customer than other things. That's a short term thing. Because we're doing something custom, it's not part of the vision, but it's important. You don't want to lose the deal to your competitor, and it's something that you just have to spend resources to, and that's the short-term thing. Whereas you have the long-term vision. Usually, the way we balance that, the most common way that most people know is ring fencing, is that you have certain amount of capacity allocated for this. The other thing that we are doing is, if you can do it right, is very effective, is demand shaping. What that is when you have a point of view on your future roadmap and you enable your sales teams effectively with that, they can actually influence the customer into wanting the things that you already plan to do. So that way, you're just like, that's why roadmaps are important. Some people think that it's a chore. Why the hell do I need a roadmap? It's because your roadmap is actually protecting your vision. And that can be very effective because you're shaping the demand and the customer is actually excited about the things that you already want. Again, like it's always an act of balance. There are customers that, but those are the 2 techniques, ring fencing and demand shaping, that I've seen are effective in these circumstances.
Yeah, I love that demand shaping. It's a great term for it. You know, in absence of having a roadmap, your customers are going to tell you all the one-off features they want.
Yeah, exactly. And they're very certain about it.
Right, 100%. Yeah, I think you also mentioned too, maybe relatedly, it's a customer advisory board and how that can act as a defensive mechanism in that regard too.
Yeah, and customer advisory boards are extremely powerful because number 1, it gets the customers to have a skin in the game. And they feel excited, they feel part of it. And then, so therefore, when you actually release this, they're not only advocating for adoption within their company, but they usually also become testimonial givers for your product in general. And then that could be a great success story that you can use to share with other customers. So it's like so many good things can come out of it. But it's important that, again, like the people that are part of the customer advisory board are decision makers, or they have deep insights, or they have the power to make decisions, ideally both. But if they have neither, they're not useful. Like they're like just sucking up your time. But it's a tricky thing to navigate. But that's what you want. Like these people should be decision makers or subject matter experts, ideally.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I'm going to bounce around a little bit just because we've got a lot of different questions. So one that we can probably all empathize with. I'm sure that you have other executives you're working with, other individuals who have a strong opinion on what the strategy should be. They all have their thing that they want. So how do you help to socialize this strategy to cross-functional stakeholders who might have conflicting initiatives or priorities where they think you should be headed, to really help bring them all together and get them all on board?
The thing that is, before I answer her, the thing that is not good, the thing you don't want is to try to satisfy all the stakeholders and somehow get to yes, and that is how you fall into this 20% is yours, 30% is yours, and then like you have this like spineless strategy, which basically is focused on like making stakeholders happy versus like having a point of view. So I think that is where executive sponsors can be super helpful, which is they are helping you, supporting you in taking hard decisions that you, because of whatever organizational structure, if I'm an and then you are like a CFO wants something, or your chief business officer wants something, and you're like a VP or like a senior director, you need somebody to also be in the room to advocate for the hard decisions. So I think that's one important thing as you're working through this. The second thing is actually, even before you get to that stage, where you need the sponsor support, which is why kicking off the project with representation from those teams is so important, because the executives are also listening to the key influencers in those teams. So when you have worked with them to form the vision in the first place, they are acting as your advocate within that team. So you're not only taking the inputs, but you're also getting support later on. Which is why if you don't have those people, then you're like, you're exclusively only relying on the sponsor, versus also having like other involves.
And when you and I chatted before this, we also talked about sort of this, sort of unique scenario, one of those special stakeholders, the founder CEO.
Yes.
Right. And how do you keep them plugged in, right? So that they don't feel distanced from it. They started this company, right? Whatever company it is. And yet, obviously you need to establish that strong point of view as a leader. So how have you kind of managed through that situation? What advice might you have for somebody in that kind of scenario?
The first thing is, it's important to approach this from a no ego of ownership standpoint. The founder is there. Usually the founder is probably the most knowledgeable person in the company about the problem space, about the customers, about the history, legacy of how we got to where we are. So number one, product leaders should not just say, oh, this is my domain, so don't mess with it. It's usually, if somebody's trying to help you, take it, because this is a hard job. And so I would just start by saying that, is if a founder is trying to help, and the best way to leverage them, because the problem though is the founder is not available throughout the journey of your vision. Their availability is spotty. So you want to take their help, but you want to make sure that you're not capitalizing on their time. So the way to do it is finding the right milestones, even having a conversation with the founder saying, hey, here are usually the milestones right after insight gathering and initial opportunity framing, then after the first draft of the strategy, then after the creation of the roadmap, at what point would you like to engage? And usually the most important founders want to engage right at the insight stage and right at the beginning of the strategy stage. So they have the most opportunity to provide and weigh in on their perspective. And you are also like not in a place where you do all this work and later on the CEO comes in and like, oh, it makes no sense. And this is not where the company is moving. It also helps you embrace the terminology. It's so important. Sometimes things are lost in English to English translation. The language that the CEO uses might not be the daily language you or your teams use, of how to position things and how to group things. So it also helps you kind of understand how the CEO is grouping things and talking about it with customers, so you can use it when you frame the strategy. So,
Yeah,
so
I like.
yeah, it's about finding the right moments of engagement.
Yeah, and I think, your advice there, like bring them in early, right? When it's still clay, when it hasn't hardened to cement, so that you don't get your work done and then find out they don't agree.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I like the clay and cement. Yeah, totally.
And so another question, once you've created your vision and strategy, following all the steps you've shared, and you're in governance mode, how do you decide when it's time to, for a new large scale effort at developing a vision and strategy? So what are those signals that tell you, hey, this needs a refresh?
Usually I've seen like two triggers. One is a time trigger almost. at the end of every fiscal year, companies generally take a moment to step back and evaluate the company strategy over the next 3 years and the objectives and make adjustments to the company strategy and objectives. And that is a great moment to then follow through to see what is the impact of the changes of what the company's direction is on product strategy and roadmap. That's usually one instance where this happens. And the most common instance where you refresh, it's usually you have a vision for 3 years and you visit it every year. The other time that this happens is like some market has changed, market environment has changed. Guild has experienced this recently, especially with the slowdown of the economy, where we kind of initially were focused heavily on expansion of the value props, penetration into the market. At some point, because of the market conditions, we also started prioritizing cost effectiveness and operational effectiveness. So that was a strategic bet shift, which happens usually mid-cycle because of external environments. And that is where your governance forums are super helpful, because that is the place. There's a listening forums, and then there's listening mechanisms, and then there's change management mechanisms. So you have these listening mechanisms where you're listening to strategy, looking at strategic bets and the change in direction. Then in the change management mechanism is where you go, hey, we looked at this change in the market and the change in company direction. And then we analyzed our product roadmap to embrace this. We need to make these 3 changes and invest in these operational efficiency features. It means that we're going to trade off probably these customer launches or these vision features. And that is the trade-off. So you go into this governance forum with both the transparency as well as the inclusivity of all the decision makers. So you're making a conscious decision as to when the change is happening, that because even when we set the strategy and roadmap, we almost say that, hey, these things are subject to change, but the change has to be conscious and properly managed.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. When you think about a governance forum, right? Like, so the economy, yes, I mean, we've all kind of seeing it coming, but at the same time, it sort of ebbed and flowed for quite a while. And so I think suddenly it felt like the year of efficiency for all of us.
Yes.
And so how do you think about the day-to-day operations of that governance forum? Like, how frequently do you meet? Because it may be that the cadence of a market change or some other external factor doesn't align to that timing. So just would love to hear a little bit more about what that looks like for you.
Yeah. And this is something we have also started doing recently. So I'm still forming my learnings. So everything I say is like early observations and early learnings. We presently do it like once every 6 weeks. It's more time-based. And we actually clubbed the roadmap check-in with the governance conversation. So what that means is every 6 weeks, we bring in important leaders, L1, meaning people reporting to the CEO, and our key stakeholders across go-to-market, marketing, operations teams. We bring in the team together, and then we share, hey, at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of the quarter, we made these promises against the roadmap. Here is how we are making progress against the roadmap. And in the same forum, we bring in the governance conversation, which is, we made a plan. How are we progressing against the plan is part 1 of the conversation. And part 2 of the conversation is, what are the changes to the plan that we need to make because of this external thing? So it's one meeting and it serves both purpose. That is how we are handling it now. And it's been effective, actually.
Oh, that sounds great. I think that's a very practical advice I think we could all leverage. And I know we're coming up on time. I think I've got time for one last question. Yeah. And I think great to maybe close on communication, given, this is all even about communication in many ways. So you've worked at large companies and smaller companies. When you think about how you ultimately communicate this vision and strategy out to the broader organization, and then secondarily to customers, how is that approach varied based on company size? Because I'm sure we've got community members kind of running the gamut too.
Great question. I think there's a bit of a 2x2 here, which is there's one problem, which is audience and purpose. When you are sharing vision and strategy, there's different audiences. Sometimes your audience is the company, and you just want to inspire, you want to make everyone feel energized about working on it. So that's like one set of audience and one purpose. A different audience and purpose could be that I'm trying to share my roadmap with the go-to-market team because they are trying to set expectations and they're trying to figure out what to sell, what not to sell. So the goal is not to like energize them and they go and like jump their chest and sell whatever they want. It is to actually be very measured. It's like, please say this and don't say this. So the content is actually different and the conversation is different. Because the goal is different than like just inspiring everyone. And similarly, so that's like one part of the 2x2, which is what is the audience and what's the objective, and the content is we tailor the content based on that. The second dimension is what's the size of the company in the 2x2, and the bigger the company, the more frequently, because people are joining, people are leaving, not everybody joins at the same time. So it definitely helps to over communicate in a larger company, especially if you're cross geo, writing things down, doing that session multiple times, having FaceTime goes a long way, especially as a company becomes bigger, because things get lost in translation. So the more you can get in front of the teams, the more often it's better. It happens less frequently in smaller companies. So it's like a 2x2. Who's the audience and what's the purpose? And then what is the size of your company?
Love that. So don't be tempted to exercise a one size fits model. And then I almost imagine when you're talking about like getting in front of teams, you're doing a tour of, kind of all of your partners, the functional leaders, like their organizations to really help cascade that message.
Yes, totally.
I love that. Great advice today. Needless to say, thank you so much for spending your time with this community. A lot to learn here and take away. So Kaylan, can't thank you enough. And to all of you who joined us today, thanks for spending your time with us.
Thank you. Excellent. Talk to you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.